And tomorrow, marking 20 years since two hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center in the United States. That set the stage for the invasion of Afghanistan and influenced the way America responded to domestic threats. In fact, the U.S. Army would spend 20 years in Afghanistan before a chaotic withdrawal from their country just last month. But the U.S. is home to millions of American Muslims, many of whom witnessed heightened Islamophobia following the 9/11 attacks. In fact, Asad Dandia is a Muslim writer and a recent graduate from Columbia University's Middle East Institute. He joins us now from Brooklyn in New York, in the middle of the night, almost, Asad, for you, and a very good morning to you from South Africa this morning. Thank you so much for staying up and talking to us. I wonder whether we can take a look at 9/11 this time around, not as the events of September 11th, 2001, but so much more happened in the run-up, in the decades before those attacks. Do you think that those are conversations, those are the kinds of knowledge that Americans themselves have about the history of what unfolded in their country on this day, now almost 20 years ago?
Thank you, first of all, Michelle, and to Newzroom Afrika for having me. It's a great honor to be here. You pose a very great question. Americans, and I say this as a born and raised American, you know, there tends to be a parochialism with regards to how we perceive ourselves in relationship to the world. Americans often have very little idea of what the country has done elsewhere. And I think that reflects how we talk about 9/11 and, you know, the events leading up to it and the events that took place thereafter. It's important, like you said, to look at history on a wider scale, right? To look at the sort of global impacts and the global repercussions, and particularly with an eye towards the global South, which often has to deal the brunt of the damage of U.S. empire. So it's an important question to ask, and I would say it's a necessary question to ask.
Asad, can I ask you this? 20 years since September 11, where were you? What were you doing 20 years ago?
20 years ago, I was in the 4th grade, grade school. I was maybe 8 years old, going on 9. I was in New York. I had just returned from a trip to Pakistan with my family. So my family is a Pakistani background, and we take visits every 2 or 3 years. And I remember very vividly seeing the smoke from the towers from school. And I remember that I knew that there was a very palpable change that took place. I didn't know the precise details of it, but I knew something was going on.
Do you remember the years after that, and how perhaps you would remember this through perhaps the stories that your own family would have told you, but how your own lives as Muslims in the U.S. changed?
Yeah, there's one example. I think the first example that comes to my mind is that when I was in 5th grade, 10 years old, there was a sniper in D.C., Washington, D.C., quite literally killing people and leaving notes next to their bodies. And there was speculation as to whether or not he was a Muslim. And I remember sitting in class and discussing this with my classmates, and we had recalled that the sniper, one of the notes that the sniper actually left was a note that said, "I am God." And a classmate of mine, Muhammad, raised his hand and said that, you know, the sniper can't possibly be a Muslim because no Muslim would ever say the words, "I am God." And I look at that, you know, retrospectively, and I see that that defensive posture that he had to take in many ways reflected my own sort of experiences in the early 2000s, taking a defensive posture and always feeling the need to, I guess, define myself against something else, or define myself by what I am not. And that was life for me growing up.
Yeah. And then you had a foray into community organizing. Tell us about that.
When I started college, I co-founded a charity called Muslims Giving Back, MGB. And essentially our purpose was to do what today is known as mutual aid, basically pulling together some of our resources, my friends and I, to buy groceries and to deliver them to underserved or undocumented families in our local neighborhoods, as well as delivering food to the homeless. And that was my real foray into service work. And the charity skyrocketed. We drew lots of attention from the community, and we gained volunteers from all over the world. And some of those volunteers, at least one of them, turned out to be a police informant, which I presume you'd like to speak about as well.
Yes, please. I mean, it would have come at a time where there was this heightened paranoia in the U.S., and I understand a particular paranoia around community organizing of any kind of form, with federal agents infiltrating organizations like the one perhaps that you started.
There was definitely heightened paranoia. In many ways, that it felt like a very abstract paranoia, but then when finding out that you in particular were being surveilled, it goes from abstract to concrete. And so a young man messages me in March of 2012. He was about my age, saying that he wants to be part of a community that does service and that does good work, and that is grounded in, a faith. And so I invited him to my local mosque. I introduced him to my friends, and he stayed with me for a very long time, for many, many months. And one day, someone from my local community, who happened to be a police officer, asks me to meet him after the evening prayers. And so I met with him after the evening prayers, and we're in his car, and he's telling me, he basically, before we get in his car, he takes my phone, he takes his phone, he puts them both in a cloth, and he throws them in his car trunk. And he essentially says he needs to speak to me without these present. And he tells me, essentially, that I'm being followed. There's a file with my name on it and my photos in it that he saw at his police precinct. Of course, it terrified me. Yeah. And many, many months later, it turned out that he was right, that the young man who had messaged me had confessed to being an informant for the police.
Sure. I mean, as you say, it goes from being just a theoretical scenario to it actually happening to you on a very, very personal level. I want to talk more broadly about what 9/11 meant for life in the U.S., for Muslims living in New York, for American Muslims. I mean, it informed in large part so much of the policy, for example, of Donald Trump insofar as the banning of particular people from coming into the country.
Yeah, 9/11 had an enormous impact on domestic politics. Of course, we know foreign politics, the two wars that were started under the Bush administration, but domestically things were very difficult. There was the Patriot Act, there was the rapid sort of erasure and erosion of our civil rights and liberties in the lead up to Donald Trump. And in the presidency of Donald Trump, we saw, for example, one of the first policies that he tried to pass was what became known as a Muslim ban, right? Banning people from particular countries that happen to be Muslim-majority countries from emigrating here or coming here to seek asylum. And so there's a policy level, right? But there's also the interpersonal level. There was an uptick in attacks against Muslims or people perceived to be Muslim after 9/11. And that uptick witnessed a resurgence under the Trump administration.
I mean, as you say, the U.S. starting two wars, and we talk about its recent withdrawal, rather hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan as well. What do you reckon is the U.S.'s responsibility now insofar as helping Afghans who want to resettle in the U.S.? We were told by soldiers in Afghanistan, by people on the ground in Afghanistan, that they were not able to honor their agreements with many hundreds of Afghans insofar as safe passage to the U.S. is concerned.
Yeah, I think it's charitable and generous of them to say that they were not able to, because when they say they were not able to, it means that they tried. And I don't think that they even tried. They did not even make an effort to take into consideration Afghans, not just Afghans who helped them, but the Afghan population in general. Yeah. There was no concern at all for them. And I think their responsibility lies with the United States right now to open its doors to Afghan asylum seekers and refugees. If there is any red tape with regards to refugee admissions, that tape should be removed. Refugees should be allowed to come into the United States without any bureaucratic hurdles that often characterize our immigration system. They should be allowed to settle, and they should be given mental health care, they should be given housing, they should be given resources, they should be given all the help that they need, because it's the very least that we can do after destroying the country for 2 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Closer to home for you, Asad, you talked about heightened Islamophobia after 9/11, in the months thereafter, in the years, in the 2 decades thereafter. Islamophobia in the U.S. today, what can you tell us?
I would say that Islamophobia still exists in the U.S. today. It didn't start with Trump. It didn't end with Trump. In fact, it didn't even start with 9/11. It existed prior to 9/11. And we have various Muslim communities that experience Islamophobia differently. We have Black Muslim communities that experience Islamophobia at the intersection of anti-Black racism. We have other communities that are not Muslim, like Sikh communities, that are targeted because they are perceived to be Muslim. And so we're witnessing, and sadly we are expecting to witness, with the Afghanistan withdrawal, a rise in anti-Muslim hate crimes. And so many of us here in the United States are on edge, but we are much more prepared to deal with it at this time because we have stronger institutions and stronger communities to grapple with it.
Asad, it's been a great pleasure talking to you this morning. Here in South Africa, almost 1 o'clock in the morning in Brooklyn, in New York. Asad Dandia is a Muslim writer joining us as we continue to reflect on 9/11, now almost 20 years on. Thank you very much indeed. Great talking to you.